I still can't bring myself to watch Wolf Hall Season 2, which is called The Mirror and the Light. And I'm actually dying to. I really am, because I think this series, both the show and the book, is a phenomenon that I haven't really experienced in my life before. I had never read a book like Wolf Hall, and I'm currently reading Bring Out the Bodies. So it's something really, really special for me in terms of Hilary Mantel's ability to speak to me in a way that I really understand. So, what do I mean by that? Hilary Mantel writes in a way that expresses her deep, deep fascination and connection with the dead. And this is fascinating for a few reasons. One of them being that she is basically like me. Practically, she is an atheist. She was a Catholic, I think, no, an Anglican maybe. But then she grew out of it, and I think she suffered because of these religious limits that were imposed on her. And she also suffered from sexism in relation to this, I think. So it was a big part of her life. And it was also a big part of mine. And both of us, in the course of our lives, became atheists. But even so, even with atheism, I find myself, and I'm sure she found herself, fascinated by the prospect of there being another reality after we shut our eyes closed, of there being life after death, of there being anything after death, of there actually being some kind of continuation after the natural breakup of matter and spirit, if you will. Spirit meaning the state of your mind being conscious and constituting what you are as a person. She's fascinated by this falling apart into its constituents biologically and maybe spiritually. It doesn't show as something that makes her out to be a believer in the afterlife. It just shows her to be fascinated by it. And in this regard, I am completely the same. To put it shortly, she has a fetish for dead people and hence history, and so do I. She writes about dead people from history. I paint them. They're always with me, the dead people. People who died like decades ago, centuries ago, millennia ago. People who basically are now dust and have passed from existence in our actively living world. And somehow, for me at least, I guess my fascination with the dead comes from the fact that somehow death gives them license in my eyes to fascinate me. Because I would never be like intrigued by someone passing on the street, like passing by me looking at them and stuff, and then me wondering about their life, their drama, their suffering, their joy. No. If I see someone on the street, I just don't give a fuck, mostly. But let's say I see a headstone, a tombstone of someone, maybe who died long ago, or died yesterday, whatever. And I see their name carved into the stone, and the dates on which they died, and how long they lived, and the type of name they have, and maybe some kind of a little epitaph from his loved ones, from their loved ones. And my brain automatically gets interested enough and invested enough to try to make up some kind of a story in my mind of this person, to try and restore them into what they maybe were, because I'm never going to know what they were actually. But still, my brain perceives this idea of them being gone as fascinating, intriguing, of them having passed and transformed into something abstract and yet still there. This makes my brain want to think about it and want to regenerate the part of them that was lost. I guess the mental exercise of me having to restore their personalities, of me having to theoretically rebuild some kind of version of them, like resurrect them in my mind. Me having to do this mental exercise makes them automatically interesting to me because them being dead is like an obstacle that I have to overcome. And so I love to paint dead people, not just paint them, but obsess over them. Like, I read a lot of history and different periods, different locations around the globe. I'm maniacal about English history, American history sometimes, the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, Persia, whatever the fuck it is. If it's dead, it very much has the chance to fascinate me and to make me start think about it deeply and for a long time and want to research it and paint it eventually. And I think in this regard, Hilary was the same in her creativity, springing from her fascination from those lives that have passed and want to have their stories told. In this sense, when you read Wolf Hall, she writes about people as if, of course, they're currently living. She writes about people from the Tudor period, this is the 16th century, through the specific viewpoint of one guy, Thomas Cromwell, and him navigating the Tudor court of Henry VIII. It's through his viewpoint that she describes the novel, and he's alive, and he sees living people, and he interacts with living people. And yet, throughout the book, all the time, it's like the dead are there with them and with him. He loses like his entire family almost, his wife and two daughters to the so-called treading sickness, which is like a 16th century plague. And so even though his family are dead, they're still there with him very much. He talks to them. He always thinks about them. He always thinks about what they would say, how they would look, how they would look at him in reaction to some of his actions throughout the novel. It's like maybe his dead wife is scolding him, or maybe his dead children are playing around him, asking him questions. He always sees them, like Cardinal Wolsey, who was his boss before he died, his old mentor. The novels take place through Thomas Cromwell's viewpoint, with Thomas Wolsey as something of an ever-present shadow on the wall in like the room where he is or something. He often asks himself, what would the cardinal do in this case? What would he say? How would he act? It's a novel about living people always being in connection with the dead. And that's not just in this book. I've been trying to get like, she has one earlier novel from like, I think 2010 or something, called Beyond Black, about a psychic, professional psychic, working in this area of like communicating with the dead and maybe helping them pass and resolve their unfinished work in life. Basically like Ghost Whisperer, only that show was kind of crap. And I've been trying to find this freaking book in the stores around here. I can't find it. I gotta order it online. But it's rooted in the same idea of the dead always being here with us. Even though they're gone, it's like they're part of us that can never go away, no matter what you do. Let me just read you this passage from Beyond Black. I couldn't find the book, but I found this passage, and you just have to hear it to understand this level of profound perception of those who have passed as something that's still there. Here's the quote. Al talked about passing. She talked about spirit. She talked about passing into spirit world, to that eventless realm, neither hot nor cold, neither hilly nor flat, where the dead, each their own best age, are marooned in an eternal afternoon, past the ages, with sod all going on. I love this expression. Spirit world, as Al describes it in her trade, is a garden, or to be more accurate, a public place in the open air, litter-free, like an old-fashioned park, with a bandstand and a heat haze in the distance. Here the dead sit in rows on benches, families together on gravelled paths, between weedless beds. There's a certain 1950s air about the dead, or early 60s perhaps, because they're clean and respectable, and they don't stink of factories, as if they came after white nylon shirts and indoor sanitation. But before satire, certainly before sexual intercourse, damaged livers have been replaced, so their owners live to drink another day. Blighted lungs now suck at God's own Lothar blend. Cancerous breasts have been rescued from the surgeon's bin. and blossom like roses on spirits' chests. I just think that's so beautiful. And when I think of the dead, because I have to in order to paint them, I think of them the same way. It's like they're there in like maybe a room or a hall, just looking at me, smiling, maybe grumpy because I bring them back, or maybe happy because I talk about them, because I mentioned your name. And it's small people most of the time. In my early years, of course, as a history geek, you always start with getting obsessed over wars and political figures and, the big guys and the big events of history. But then later on, at least for me, I started to realize that real world history isn't just about the big faces and the big names. It's mostly, as it nowadays is, the world is about regular people like you and me, small people, working class people, maybe even poor people, homeless people, sick people, dead people, suffering people, just like the living nowadays world. So history is based mostly on us. And it's the smaller stories that started to fascinate me. And in this sense, Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall is about a small person, Thomas Cromwell. He worked in government, but he came from nothing. He was from Putney, which was like then a village near London. His father was a blacksmith, and they were poor. I guess not poor, but the then middle class, which was poor in comparison to nowadays. And so Hillary understood this element of history, that first, it's mostly about small folk, and second, it's inescapably connected to the dead. They're always there. Even though they've passed, they always guide events because their memory is still there. What they did still has an effect on present events. What they said, their voices are still in the people who loved them or hated them, and they still command them to an extent. They still affect them and affect their actions. And in this sense, Hillary is one of the best authors I've read in my lifetime because she shares this passion of mine for restoring what isn't there anymore and trying to retell it intertwined with the living, like the living and the dead, all acting as one. And it shows not just through the way she tells the story, but also through like her writing style, like not always mentioning who speaks, like he said or she says, uh, she did, he did, they did. And it's like, for a moment, you have to wonder who she's talking about. And not because she writes in a crappy way, it's because she writes like in a mosaic by taking out some of the parts of this mosaic so that you have to fill in the blanks in a way. She wants to make you work for it a little bit. And not just stylistically, but also historically, because these books, if you are not familiar with your Tudor history, you are just not ready to read these novels. You have to be prepared in like knowing who these people are, what they did, and it's a lot of them, like 50 Thomases, 20 Annes, 30 Marys. It's complicated, and this novel is not for people who never read about Henry VIII or Anne Boleyn or Thomas Cromwell, Thomas Wolsey. It is immensely complicated and difficult to figure out in terms of who did what, why they did it, in terms of characters' motives, and the manner in which historical events play out. And she did the friggin' historic work. She knows what she's doing. She knows where, at each point in time, every person was. Maybe like they were traveling or somewhere, they were sick maybe, they were at court, they were at some other town or whatever. She knows where they are. She knows what they said, according to the sources. She knows what they had. She knows what they worked. She knows the qualifications that they had to have for this work. And she's just brilliant. I've read like a ton of historical novels, historical fiction. I don't think any of them were as efficient as she was in reconstructing the world of these people, not only in terms of like, the outward stuff, economy, buildings, clothing styles, what they ate, what they worked, what they had to endure in terms of health. She knows this. And on top of that, she's figured out all, supposedly, she's figured out all of their motives and their way of thinking. And they're complex characters because every one of them is a blend. Like Thomas Cromwell, he was both a thug, but also a good person, a man of the people. Henry VIII had his good sides, but then you know about him as well. He was kind of a piece of shit. Anne Boleyn, yeah, she died undeservedly. But at the same time, was she perfect? Was she a very nice person? No, she wasn't. She was ambitious, she was power hungry, she indirectly caused death and suffering to many people. And at the same time, she loved her daughter. She cared for her family and stuff. She wanted to give to charity. She wanted to work for social causes. Like, every one of them is complex. And Hillary captured that, like no other historical author has done, maybe. So, yeah, I mainly wanted to say that this is why she fascinates me, and her work is so precious to me. And I still have not watched the show, and I will not watch it, not until I finish the books. I want to read the second novel, and I want to read the third novel, The Mirror and the Light, on which the second season of the current show is based. I feel like, because I love her so much and I relate to her so much in terms of style of work, I owe it to her to experience her genuinely, meaning not through the lenses of television or anything else. I want to experience her through her books. I feel like I owe her that. Or maybe I owe this to me as a huge fan of her, because if you're a huge fan of someone's work, what better way is there to experience their work than reading their work directly? The primary source. Because I watched Wolf Hall season 1 before I read the book, the novel. And of course, I loved the novel and I loved the show. But the thing is, I hate it when I've experienced this thing that I'm so amazed by through television first. Because television is always the shallower way of experiencing it. It's always more compressed, shortened, for TV's sake, for popularity's sake. The book is always so much more complex, so much more layered, and it makes you invest so much more willpower, ambition to understand it. And it sounds laborious, but it's rewarding because I don't feel this is like work for me. Yeah, I put in effort to understand it and to experience it, but at the same time, this effort is something that gives back to me this privilege to experience the story through Hilary Mantel's eyes. Anyway, I meant to say that I cannot wait. I really can't wait to watch this freaking show. And I will. I just want to finish the books first. And to everyone out there, whether you are interested in history or not, whether you know about these people or not, take a chance with Hilary. Take a chance with Wolf Hall. Try reading those books without context, maybe even, if you will, just to experience her style and this talent of hers to revive and make you feel people who are not there. It sounds a bit cheesy because this is basically the purpose of every novel, like making you feel you're really in there in the story, no matter if it's history or fantasy or whatever. That's the purpose of the book, right? Of the fiction, to make you forget about your real world and experience that one in the pages. Yeah, that's the purpose of every novel. But nobody, at least from the ones that I've read, does it like Hilary Mantel. It really is, for a reader, an outwardly experience. And if you're a fan of the historical period, all the better for you. Just, I think she's so underappreciated. And she got a lot of awards, I think. She's had her fame. It's not like she has not been noticed. She has. But at the same time, so many other authors are like so much more popular than she was. And she died like 2 years ago, so this was it for her. And now she's with me. She's with the dead. But I feel like she deserves so much more praise and analysis and appreciation of what she did. Because also, you can see that her books are written in blood almost. You can feel the pain in the words that she wrote. You can feel her suffering because she suffered a lot in life. She had, I think, endometriosis or something, which was not curable at the time she was young. So she suffered. And I think she was even institutionalized because people thought she was going crazy or something because of the pain she was in and nobody knew what it was. Yeah, so she had a lot of pain in her life. And she wasn't one of the people who just surrendered to it. She took that pain and she poured it out on the page, thousands of pages. And when you read the characters in her books, they suffer with her, they suffer like her. They're in pain, they die, they cry, they're scared. It's like every single person in her books is, of course, fictional, based on real people, but fictional. And yet she makes them feel real because she can emulate pain in a realistic sense, which is something that I can't say for other authors that I've been maniacal about. Let's say George Martin. I'm not saying he's not genius. A Song of Ice and Fire is brilliant and masterfully done. But if I have to speak as to the realism of his characters, a lot of people will say, yeah, they feel super hyper realistic. They feel like so relatable. They feel like, and I'm like, not really. At least for me, like I can't say that the characters in the Song of Ice and Fire were masterful in their realism. Uh, I think people by realism, when they say realism in a Song of Ice and Fire, they mean like it not being like a cliche fantasy like Lord of the Rings or something, because they're not like fairies or elves or dwarves, and they don't only talk about honor. They speak a bit like modern people, like always cursing and whatever. They're realistic in this sense that they behave a little bit more like people out of fantasy, but not quite in the real world. Because let's say my favorite character, for example, was Cersei Lannister, because she was, first of all, she was insane, she was complex and whatever, but she didn't necessarily feel that realistic to me. I know, like in real life, of course, there are a lot of people who are rich and delusional and in their bubble. Like this is basically the entire aristocracy nowadays. But I don't think like any of them would get to Cersei's level of delusion or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass. Whatever. Even though I love George R. R. Martin and I love Song of Ice and Fire, Hilary Mantel is like, at least for me, much, much better at portraying people, their motives, and their thinking in a way that feels real. And so, yeah, I will watch The Mirror and the Light, but first I want to finish the books. And this might happen in 5 years because I read like 50 books at the same time. But even so, I will. Before I die, I will watch the show. And don't get me wrong, if you want to watch the show, watch it without reading the book. It's fine. But the show isn't like, even though it's an amazing Tudor show in general, an amazing historical show, and I'm speaking about the first season because I haven't seen the second one yet, it's just not as brilliant as the book. It cannot transfer this level of complexity from the page onto the screen. All the layers of the living and the dead, all the layers of complex motives that you can interpret from just reading the person's words. It's just not the same. I mean, you know what I'm talking about if you're a reader. Just read the book first and then watch the show. And this is what I wanted to say basically, how much I love Hilary Mantel, how much she means to me, and how much I owe to her, because she as well is one of the main building blocks of my work. She's a huge inspiration to me, and she will always be, will be. She is, even though she's dead, she is and she will be an inspiration to me. To the day I die, maybe even after. Who knows? In this sense, Hilary Mantel is still alive for me, and she will always be. And she will talk to me through the pages.